You're listening to the Men's Podcast from PursueGOD.org.
Amen. Welcome back to the podcast. Pastor John here, and looking forward to sharing with you today. We're covering a topic that just has been jumping out at me a lot as I've been spending my daily reading time in the Old Testament recently, and that is the idea of intentionally speaking blessing. Now, specifically speaking blessing to our children, but we're going to broaden that net just a little bit and just talk about using our words in general to bring life. The Bible talks about how our tongue has the power to bring life or death. And I hope that we would be men who use our words to bring life. As I mentioned in a lot of my Old Testament reading recently, the blessings of fathers to their sons has just seemed to jump off the page. Isaac's blessing to Jacob and Esau, even, with the stealing of that blessing and the deception that Jacob did. Isaac's intentionality to want to speak blessing over his son before he passed away. In fact, that's what set up that whole deception. He had told Esau, go out in the field, harvest the game that I like to eat, bring it back because I know my days are drawing to an end and I want to speak a blessing over you. And then again, Jacob blessing his sons. And we see this intentional effort by Jacob to speak to each and every one of his sons and even to Joseph's two sons. And so that's what I want to look at today. I've been the beneficiary of words of blessing and affirmation many times in my life, and I don't think I could overstate how important those have been. When I was a real young boy, well, even up until my teens, my dad introduced me to everyone as his hero. The first time I met someone, if my dad was introducing me to a coworker, to an old friend of his, he would always say, "This is my hero." And then he would tell them, his name's John. I mean, I'll never forget that. I had a Sunday school teacher when I was in 6th grade who saw me as a leader and told me so. I didn't grow up with money. I wasn't super popular as a young child. Probably didn't fit the mold that most people would have called a leader, but this Sunday school teacher took me aside and said, I see you as a leader. I see people responding to you. That had a significant impact on me. My junior high football coach, now he didn't say it to me directly, but I heard him say it to another coach. He said I was the toughest 90-pounder he had ever coached. I was an undersized offensive lineman, not really athletic, but too stupid to know any better. And so I played offensive line throughout high school, even though I graduated at $155. But that affirmation of my toughness from a guy that I knew was tough, a guy that I respected, that had played college football, meant the world to me. And then even in my adult life, I've had individuals pour into me with words of affirmation and words of blessing. In fact, just this morning, I got an email from one of my fellow overseers and his wife, and it was a prayer of thanksgiving. They were thanking God for me and for my influence at our church and for my leadership and for my desire to serve Jesus. And that just changed my whole day. It just made me so excited. And they didn't know I was doing this podcast on words of affirmation. I don't think that's coincidence. God is not a God of coincidence. God is always orchestrating things. And so I hope that there has been someone in your life who has used their words to build you up and bring you life. And if there hasn't been, I truly want you to know, man, if you can't say, yeah, there's been that person in my life, I want you to know, I'm sorry for that. Like, my heart breaks for you. But I also want you to know you can be the one to change that cycle. You can be the first in a long line of encouragers. And I do want you to know that God says you are fearfully and wonderfully made. That God looks at you and he says, my workmanship is marvelous. That's a verse I talk about a lot. I just think the more we understand what God says about us, the more it changes our outlook on everything. And so I want you to know that God affirms you. If you've put your faith in Jesus Christ, God says, I see you through his perfection. God says, I see you as white as snow. And I want you to hear that today, men. And I hope that you will engage in relationships with other men who would be willing to speak words of encouragement to you. But let's make sure we're doing it. Even if we haven't been the beneficiary of that kind of affirmation, let's make sure we start that trend, and let's make sure that we use our words to bring life. So let's start by just talking about controlling our tongue. Our words have the power to bring life or death, and we should use our words to encourage and build up those around us. Ephesians 4:29 tells us not to use foul or abusive language, but let everything you say be good and helpful so that your words will be an encouragement to those who hear them. There's two parts of this command, right? There's a restrictive part. There's a part that tells us what not to do. Hey, don't use foul or abusive language. If that's all we did, what an improvement that would be for people around us. I have to confess, I have used foul and abusive language many times in my life. I've used abusive language with those that I love the most, those that I hold the most dear, my wife, my kids. I've definitely said negative and critical things that were harmful to them. So that's the first part of the command, but then replace that. So don't just not use foul or abusive language, but then instead let's replace that with the positive part of this command, which is let everything you say be good and helpful so that your words will be an encouragement to those who hear them. I like to look at it as offense and defense. Not using foul or abusive language is playing defense. And anyone who's a sports fan knows, good defense wins championships. So let's really be careful about controlling our tongue, but let's also play some offense. Let's move the ball against the enemy. Let's use our words to build others up, to encourage them. Proverbs 18:21 tells us that the tongue has the power of life and death, and those who love it will eat its fruit. James talks about it in the New Testament as well. James chapter 1, and I'm going to read verses 19 and 20 and then verse 26. He says, "My dear brothers and sisters, take note of this. Everyone should be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry, because human anger does not produce the righteousness that God desires. Those who consider themselves righteous and yet do not keep a tight rein on their tongues deceive themselves, and their religion is worthless." Again, this is more of the defensive posture here, this idea of controlling our tongue. And the first thing James says is, hey, just don't talk. Now, obviously, he doesn't say don't ever talk, but he says, listen, be quick to listen, slow to speak, and slow to become angry. I can't think of how many times in my life I could have avoided an embarrassing situation. I could have avoided hurting someone's feelings. I could have avoided having to go back and confess and ask for forgiveness if I would have just kept my mouth shut. If I just would have put a muzzle on it for 60 seconds, maybe 2 minutes, just give myself time to process what was going on, to take it to the Lord in prayer quickly. So be slow to speak, slow to become angry. Again, that is the defensive posture. James continues in chapter 3 as he talks about the power of the tongue and controlling it. He says in verse 3 of chapter 3, "When we put bits into the mouths of horses to make them obey us, we can turn the whole animal. Or take ships as an example. Although they are so large and are driven by strong winds, they are steered by a very small rudder wherever the pilot wants to go. Likewise, the tongue is a small part of the body, but it makes great boasts. Consider what a great forest is set on fire by a small spark. The tongue also is a fire, a world of evil among the parts of the body. It corrupts the whole body, sets the whole course of one's life on fire, and is itself set on fire by hell." And then lastly, in chapter 3, verses 9 and 10, James says, "With the tongue we praise our Lord and Father, and with it we curse human beings who have been made in God's likeness. Out of the same mouth come praise and cursing. My brothers and sisters, this should not be." It is so hard to control our tongue. And one of the reasons is the Bible tells us that it's out of the depths of our heart that the mouth speaks. So it's the things going on in our heart. We know that our heart is deceitful. We know that it's desperately wicked. And so that's one of the reasons it's so hard to control our tongue. But again, I would just encourage you, men, pause, take a breath, count to 10, go to the Lord in prayer before you respond. Let's really work hard at controlling our tongue. But I don't think we should stop there. As I've been reflecting on these different blessings in the Bible, I see that these individuals didn't just refrain from saying negative things, that they actually use their words to bring life. So I want to transition from this idea of a defensive posture to playing offense, moving the ball down the field and putting points on the board. Controlling our tongue to not respond harshly or critically is the first step. I do think that's where we start. But then we can move from there and we can learn to use our words to bring blessing and life. Now, this takes intentionality. And for most of us, it takes practice. We're not naturally good at it. A lot of us are not great at articulating how we feel and things that we're excited about. So it's going to take some work. But anything worth doing takes a little work, right? I mean, that's probably something your dad taught you growing up as a young man. Hey, if it's worth doing well. And it is important to speak words of affirmation to those that we love. Mark chapter 1, verses 9 through 11. And in the context, this is when Jesus is being baptized by John the Baptist. It says, at that time, Jesus came from Nazareth in Galilee and was baptized by John in the Jordan. Just as Jesus was coming up out of the water, he saw heaven being torn open and the Spirit descending on him like a dove. And a voice came from heaven, "You are my Son, whom I love. With you I am well pleased." Now that's the first time we see God the Father make this public affirmation of God the Son. That God the Father wanted Jesus to know, I love you. I am well pleased with you. It happens again in Mark chapter 9 in the scene of the Transfiguration. So if you recall the story, Jesus is up on the mountain and Peter and James and John are with him. It says, then a cloud appeared and covered them, and a voice came from the cloud. This is my Son, whom I love. Listen to him. Our children need our encouragement. Your sons, your daughters need to hear from you that you love them, that you affirm them. Now, I know you work hard at putting a roof over their head. I know you work hard to get them to soccer games and to get them to church and all the things you do to provide. And men, that's crucial too. I'm not taking away from that. But our kids need so much more than that. Our kids need affirmation from us. They need us to speak blessing to them and over them. Now think about this for a second. If God the Father publicly affirmed Jesus, if God knew that that was important, if he knew Jesus needed that, how much more do our children need it? Because Jesus didn't struggle with insecurity. Jesus knew exactly who he was. Jesus had no questions about his significance or his value or his identity. Can our kids say that? I think it's clear when you look at what's going on in our culture and all that our kids face. Our kids do have questions about their significance. Our kids do have questions about their value. Our kids do have questions, unfortunately, even about their identity. So we need to make sure that we are speaking words of affirmation to our children. What if your child's primary love language is words of affirmation? See, if their love language is words of affirmation, even if you're doing all the other things, if you are providing for them, if you're doing acts of service for them, if you're spending quality time with them, if there's an appropriate level of physical touch, but you are not speaking words of affirmation, their love tank's not going to be full. It's going to be running on empty. And if your love language is not words of affirmation, it's going to be uncomfortable for you. You're going to have to be intentional about doing it. Because if your love language is, say, quality time, and that's how you feel most loved, your default will be to love your children in the same love language that you prefer. That's just how we all are. It works that way in a marriage. It works that way with our kids. If we're not intentional about it, we will primarily love someone in the love language that we most like to receive. because it just makes sense to us. So if your child's love language is words of affirmation, I just want to be honest with you, man, you're going to have to work overtime on this. You're going to have to be really intentional. And you may be sitting there right now and say, I don't even know what my child's love language is. Well, that would be a great study to do. That'd be a great conversation to have with your kids. We do have the 5 love language conversations at PursueGOD.org as part of our resources. They can take the free inventory and you can help your children discover what their love language is, because that's going to allow you as a parent to be more intentional about speaking those words of affirmation, those words of blessing, and they're going to receive that. When we're speaking words of affirmation and words of blessing to our children, I think it's important to be specific. And I would also encourage you to try to spend most of your time speaking words of affirmation on things that they can control. So, for example, I can tell my son, man, I'm really proud of how hard you work, because he can control that. Now, I might be proud of his performance on the field if he's an athlete, but the reality is sometimes the other kid's just better. Sometimes the other kid's just bigger and stronger. And so if all of my affirmation is always tied to success, if it's tied to victory, then he's going to view my affirmation as performance-based. That as long as he's winning, as long as he's the top dog, then I'm proud of him. Now, I'm not an everybody gets a cookie kind of guy. I think it's okay to want to win, and I think it's okay to affirm kids when they have victory, because they put in a lot of hard work and a lot of effort to get there. But don't make your affirmation all about the outcome. Make it on the things that they can control. And then just be as specific as you can. Son, I'm proud of the fact that you got up and went to the gym every morning at 6 a.m. this spring to get ready for the next season. Or if you have a daughter, same context, if she's in athletics, I'm proud of you for this, and be very specific. If it's their academic accomplishments, if they have a musical talent, whatever it is. And then also just say things like, I'm proud of you. I'm proud that you're my son. I'm proud that you're my daughter. Here's another one. You're a blessing to me. Do your children feel like they're a blessing to you, or do they feel like they're a burden to you? Think about the majority of the interactions you have with your kids and the words that you use. Would they say, oh yeah, I'm a blessing to my mom and dad? Or would they say, no, I feel more like a burden to my mom and dad? You can encourage them on wisdom. Hey, that's a really wise decision you made. Or I really like how you stood on God's word there, even though I'm sure that was a tough decision. You can affirm character traits that are God-honoring. I love the fact that you're humble. I love that you're kind. I love that you're generous. And if you can tie in specific examples of their kindness, of their humility, of their generosity, that's even better, because it's not just empty words. You're giving them evidence, things you've seen of why you think they're kind, of why you think they're humble, of why you think they're wise. But this is a way for you to go from just playing defense to playing offense. And again, I'm using this primarily in the context of your children, men, but don't forget to affirm your spouse. Let your spouse know she's a blessing to you. And you may say, man, Pastor John, right now where I'm at in my marriage, I don't know that my spouse is a blessing. Like overall, I don't know if I'd say she's a blessing to me. There are still parts of your relationship. There has to be at least a few things that she does where she's a blessing to you. So choose to focus on that. Choose to affirm the positives in the relationship. One other thing I just want to talk about today that, again, has struck me as I'm reading through the Old Testament is the significance of ceremony. I think we've lost a lot in American culture with the lack of ceremony that we have. Creating opportunities for more formal statements of blessing and encouragement can have a deep impact on your children. There is power in ceremony. So I would encourage you to look for significant events in the lives of your children and use those as opportunities to bring life with your words. Now, again, this is going to take time. It's going to take effort. For most of us, it's probably going to be better if we write these words down. Now, there's still obviously plenty of opportunities and plenty of moments where we should just do spontaneous, off-the-cuff words of encouragement and words of affirmation. Those are special. And often it's those little moments like that our kids will cherish and remember for forever. But in these more formal opportunities, I'd write it down. I'd pray over it. God, here's what I want to communicate to my son. God, here's what I want to communicate to my daughter. Please give me the words. Please help me to get across just how proud of them I am, and write it down. And I think there are many, many opportunities where you could do this. I'm just going to highlight a few. And obviously the depth of what you would write or say is going to change at different stages of their life. But take a couple of these down, see if this would be a good opportunity for you to start being more intentional. One would just be when they're starting school. And you might think, what? You want me to do words of affirmation or speak blessing over a 5-year-old? Man, I have missed a lot of opportunities to speak blessings over my children, but one of the areas where I didn't miss those opportunities is when they started school. And so for my kids, I wrote a letter to each one of them, within a week or two of when they started school, all the way back in kindergarten, and just affirmed them and blessed them. Your kids will cherish that. So starting school might be a good time. Starting junior high, starting high school, when you have the purity talk. If you've had the birds and the bees talk, man, I think that's a great time to speak blessing over your son and to affirm him. I think it's a great time to, in a written letter, to say, son, my heart for you is that you would honor God with your sexuality. My heart for you is that you would do the manly thing, not the boy with whiskers thing, that you do the manly thing and you'd save it for marriage. That you would treat the girls you go out with respect. That you would treat them like you would hope someone would treat your sister. Those are powerful opportunities to speak blessing and encouragement to your son. A first job would be another great example. So son or daughter, they get their first job, to speak words of affirmation to them, to say, I'm proud of you for wanting to work. Work is a good thing. And to remind them that primarily we work as unto the Lord. That at the end of the day, ultimately our boss is God Most High. And that's who we're trying to please. And so have a good work ethic. And I'm proud of you for the kind of work ethic you have. And I'm thankful that you're the type of employee that your coworkers are going to want to be around. When they get their driver's license, that's another great opportunity to do a more formal affirmation, that there is a lot of responsibility that comes with this motor vehicle. Don't text and drive, don't drive impaired. All these things. Now, some of that is speaking instruction to them as well, obviously, but telling them that you're proud of them, telling them that, hey, you've earned my trust. So because of the way you've carried yourself, I trust you to drive this vehicle. That's a big thing, to know that your mom and dad trust you, to know that they're putting this in your hands. I think that brings a lot of encouragement to young men and young women. Their first date. Now, this isn't a podcast on dating and how you should date and if dating's biblical, and that's a whole nother conversation. But let's just assume for the moment that you're okay with your child dating in high school. Man, what a great time to speak blessing. What a great time to remind your child that God should hold the primary place in your heart. It shouldn't be some young man or young woman that at the end of the day, God is the only one who can fulfill all your needs anyway. Protect your heart. Don't put yourself in awkward situations. I trust you to make the right decisions. I'm proud of you for making the right decisions. When your son or daughter has their first child, so when you become a grandparent, I wrote my son a letter, probably 6 months ago now. They have a daughter that's only 2 weeks old, but as he and his wife were expecting, I just wanted to affirm for my son, you're going to be a great dad. You've got some of my good qualities, but praise God, you have qualities that I don't have. My son is a lot more even-tempered than I am. My son does do a better job at controlling his tongue than I have done for much of my life. And I wanted to affirm that in him. I wanted him to know that's going to serve you well when you're a dad. And I also wanted him to know that you're going to mess up and I'm still going to love you and God's still going to love you. You're not going to be a perfect dad. There's no such thing as the perfect dad except for our Heavenly Father. God is the perfect father. The rest of us, we're going to make mistakes. So when your son or daughter has that first child, make that a powerful opportunity to do some sort of ceremony, even if you just give them the letter, even if it's not, a big dinner or anything like that, but some sort of ceremony as they head into parenthood, affirming them and blessing them. Just a couple of more, and then we'll wrap this up. I think when they purchase a home or if they move into a new area, even if they're just renting, but just affirm for them that your house is going to be a place of refuge. Your house is going to be a place where God is honored. And if you continue to honor God, then as your kids come home from school, as you guys come home from work, as you come to a place where the world's been trying to beat you down all day, your home is going to be a home of refuge. I know, again, guys, that takes work. This won't just happen easily. For some of you, you're going to write and rewrite and throw it away and write and rewrite again. And guess what? That's okay. You don't have to say it perfectly. Do the best you can, put some time and energy into it, but then just trust that God's going to allow your son, allow your daughter, or allow your spouse to receive that in the way that he wants them to receive it. But moving forward, I just would encourage you, let's not just play defense. That's a great place to start. Let's control our tongue. Let's be quick to listen. Let's be slow to speak, but let's not end there, okay? Let's use our words to bring life, to bring blessing, to bring encouragement, and let's put some energy into it. Okay, let's make sure that we're looking for opportunities to do it just off the cuff and spontaneous, but also that we're looking for opportunities to do it in a little more formal manner where it's going to have a real impact for our kids. Talk about this with other men in your small group. Talk about this with your mentor and make some specific action steps on how you can use your words to bring life this week.
Thanks for listening. If you haven't already, please consider rating our podcast. It's a simple way to help us reach more people. Find more resources to talk about these topics with your small group, family, or mentor on PursueGOD.org.